Jerry, take us through the East, sir.
Yeah, so in the East, we have a familiar name in an unfamiliar place. Gonzaga as a 9 seed.
Woo.
And Gonzaga, they've got a gaudy net ranking. They're in the top 15 of the net, but they don't have the wins to back that up. And the reason that they're so high in the net is because they're 5th in average scoring margin, which has a big influence on the predictive metrics like the net. So, but you see their best wins are Baylor and San Diego State. Those are bubble teams. They lost to West Virginia, which is another bubble-ish kind of team, but then also Oregon State and Santa Clara. So the performance hasn't lived up to the ranking, but the performance is what's got them in the middle of the bracket.
Jerry, if this plays out, Gonzaga in an unfamiliar place and getting Maryland as an 8 seed is no favor. But I can't help but look at the possibility of St. John's and Duke, if that was in a final, regional final, in Newark at the Meadowlands. That would be incredible because the Dukies could have just as many people there as the Johnnies. They've got more students from New Jersey than anywhere else. That would be electric, that place. And I don't think the Johnnies would necessarily have a home game.
No, clearly, but they have a team that could do damage, St. John's. I tell you, they're defending at such a high level, and if they ever start to shoot the ball with any type of consistency, they could really be dangerous. I love R.J. Lewis, and I tell you what, when that Hall of Fame coach on the sidelines, Rick Pitino, gets to the 2nd year with a program, magic happens. So keep an eye on those Johnnies because they're rolling. They got a big one later today. Creighton.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, at the Garden. That place is going to be jumping.
Rocket.
It's going to be jumping.
Yeah, a lot of fun. You know, I wanted to talk about Clemson, which I think would be very dangerous as a 7 seed.
I agree.
Old physical team. Remember, they had that run of the Elite Eight. But, Jerry, I want to ask you about Arkansas because we thought a couple of weeks ago they were totally dead. Turns out they were only mostly dead.
Oh,
because
nice.
you've got them on the 11 line. Break it down for us. Is Calipari going to the tournament?
Not quite dead yet. Well, that win at Kentucky has revitalized their tournament chances. But, I mean, look, they were in a play-in game, so they're one of the last 4 teams in, which means the margin for error still is not great. But that win over Kentucky has given them life, and they've kept winning. I mean, they haven't been perfect, of course, but they keep going. And if they can finish strong, and they're going to have to finish strong, they have a chance to get in, you know, closer to 11 than 13 with the SEC.
Right.
It's in part because they've got the first 4 teams in.
By the way, they beat Michigan in the Garden, and now Michigan is still winning, so they're breaking out their pom-poms for sure. That's pretty cool.
For sure.
And they got the win over Texas, so it becomes a head-to-head situation, right? Where you're trying to figure out which of these SEC teams.
Well, that's a team that dropped out when I went from 14 to 13 was Texas.
Yeah.
From 14 to 13.
It's going to be way more than 11. I want action on that.
Arkansas over Texas.
Your Midwest region. Put it on the board.
My Midwest region, it's my team. Boiler up. But how about Missouri, a number 6 seed in this region? This is a team that was 0-18 in the SEC last year. Dennis Gates got this thing turned around. They won at Florida. They beat Ole Miss. They beat Kansas. I mean, they've got some really good wins. No real bad losses at all. So this is a team, I think, deserving of a top 25 type of seed. And, of course, because you're in the SEC, you've still got upward mobility if you can win some of these games late.
Yeah.
Seth?
Yeah, so I'm looking at Ohio State as a 3 seed there, Jerry. One thing about them is they lost a really good player.
Who did you say? Iowa.
Iowa State. I'm sorry. Did I say Ohio? I may have because I'm always.
Clark heard Ohio.
I'm always trying to curry favor with Clark Hella. No, Iowa State, because Jerry, they had a player, Milan Momcilovic, get injured for about 5 weeks. Came back earlier than actually projected. They're so much better with him than without them. If they go on a tear now and start winning games, number one, the resume gets better, but is it almost a double win for them because the committee says, well, they're so much better with Momcilovic in the lineup?
Well, yeah, but the losses still count. You know, so they're not going to assume that they would have won games that he didn't play. But because they're in the Big 12, if they can make a run, you know, and win all the way out, they could put themselves in play for a number 1, depending on what other teams do. Now, you know, there's not much of a margin for error to make a play for a number 1, but if they win all the way out, they'd be part of that conversation, I'm pretty sure.
Interesting. Well, I'm taking a look at this Louisville team. You mentioned the job that Missouri has done and Dennis Gates turning that team around from a year ago. Pat Kelsey has done much the same with the Louisville Cardinals, and they're a dangerous team. I mean, they score at a high level, shoot the three, play aggressively. So that Louisville team, they will be in the field clearly, and they'll be dangerous because they probably can't get to the 4 line, the top 4, but they'll be one of those 5 to 8, 9 seeds that could be really problematic for an opponent.
You know, it's crazy. We're not used to seeing Kansas on the 4 line. So many teams would be so happy to be there. But don't sleep on them.
No, that's right.
They've still got the big 3, DeJuan Harris, Hunter Dickinson, KJ Adams. DeJuan Harris played against us in the 23 Final Four. He's still playing. And we didn't play him, and he hit threes and killed us. Those guys have a lot of NCAA basketball experience. When you get to tournament time, it's a whole different ballgame. The guys that have played in that tournament can carry you through games. No matter how talented you are, if you haven't been there before, you can struggle.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, maybe they'll take it personally, being a 4 seed. Injuries have come up a couple times. How much adjusting is there for a key player being out 3 or 4 games at this juncture in the season versus maybe a month from now?
It's less than you think, because most people think, well, our best player was hurt, those games don't count. Well, they do count. The losses count. There's some context that they apply, but they're not going to pretend you would have won. They're not going to go to that level. Mm-hmm. They're just going to say, all right, well, maybe this team is a little better than the record might show. Yeah. But most of the time, you don't notice that there's an adjustment at all.
Let's start with Auburn and the South region, the #1 overall seed being Auburn. Here is your South region, Jared.
Yeah, so Michigan State was one of the teams I missed. And that's a team that's got 5 Quad 1 wins, but not all Quad 1 wins are the same. Only 2 of those wins are against teams that are actually in the bracket. Wow. And then they took that home loss to Indiana. And I think that ends up being a distinguishing thing. The home loss to Indiana is a Quad 2 loss. Even the loss to USC is still Quad 1 because it was a road game. Mm-hmm. Again, not all Quad 1 games are the same, but I think that's why Michigan State's a 5 and not higher.
Yeah, I'm looking at that Texas Tech team on the 4 line. They've been really impressive all season, particularly of late. Do a great job defensively. They got one of the best transfers in the country in J.T. Toppin, and seem to be on an ascension in how they're playing. I really think outside of the top 4 lines, I mean, you start looking at 5 through 9 and 10 seeds, there are going to be a lot of dangerous quality teams in that segment of the bracket.
Love the Tritons of UC
yes,
San Diego.
I do too.
I know you do on the 11 line, locked in a fierce battle with UC Irvine in the Big West. 11 seed, Jerry puts them kind of on that at-large cut line. You think between San Diego and Irvine, one of them can get an at-large?
I think it's unlikely. And if you look here at San Diego's resume, their strength of schedule is beyond 200. Yeah. And they just don't have the kind of wins to make up for something like that. Plus, you're talking about another loss in their conference tournament. They've got 2 losses already outside of Quad 1 and 2. So I just think I don't think it's an at-large team.
Yeah. A lot of interesting teams here. Mississippi State playing in the South. I think they've got a lot of wins coming their way still. And how about Oregon, Jerry? Oregon's got a lot of Quad 1 wins, right?
Yeah.
They just have some tough losses, but what did their resume look like?
Yeah, I mean, and that's it. They've got some tough losses, and not all Quad 1 wins are the same, but Oregon has done pretty well. But it's just it's been the lack of consistency, and that's why 7 is borderline top 25. So that's, that's not bad, but they just haven't been consistent enough. And they've got a bunch of home losses, which is really kind of odd.
Yeah,
right.
I'm already trying to figure out who my Cinderella is, and then I remember this is just for fun.
Well,
it's always for fun.
If you're looking for one potentially, George Mason.
Oh.
Keep an eye on that team. If you're looking for a double digit.
Been on them since November.
Yeah.
Mark it down.
Speaking of familiar teams and unfamiliar places, there's UConn as an 8 seed. The 2-time champs have really had a rough go of things. They had that lost weekend in Maui. They lost to Colorado at that tournament. They lost to Dayton. It's just this has not been the kind of a season that you would expect from them. And Baylor, Gonzaga, among their best wins. But Marquette, obviously a really good team. But there's still time for UConn, but it's been relatively hit and miss. It's still more hits and misses, or they wouldn't be here at all. But the consistency just hasn't been there for them.
A team that it really interests me is Kentucky, because they're a 3 seed, well-deserved. They got 8 quad one wins, which is really impressive. Some of the most in the country, but man, they've been banged up. You know, Lamont Butler's out right now, and I don't know when he's going to come back.
And then Jackson Robinson missed the last.
Okay.
He's going to miss today's game as well with the wrist injury, and he missed the last game, so he's been out a couple.
And they beat Tennessee without both of them. Lamont Butler got hurt in that game again. He re-injured his shoulder, but he's so important to that team. I think it's a team when healthy that could beat anybody, but if they're banged up, they could be in trouble there.
Yeah. Tell you, I'm looking at this Memphis team, and you could argue that Memphis played the toughest non-conference schedule of anybody in the country, certainly in the top three. And you could also argue they have the most impactful transfer, particularly in the backcourt of any team in the country when you talk about P.J. Haggerty. He's been outstanding. Gets to the free throw line almost 10 times a game, can make shots, can make plays, rebounds from the guard position. He has had a huge impact on that team, as has Dame Danger from Illinois. The big fella has been doing major work. Dine-in eating.
All three of their
Buffet
guards.
style?
Buffet style,
Can you
exactly.
dine in? You have a buffet in the home to dine in?
You dine in, that's right. No drive-through. Going right inside.
Love it.
Nobody wants to see that trio of guards in the NCAA tournament because they can control the tempo of a game. If it gets close to any one of those three can go
You're
get
talking
the bucket.
Memphis. Yes, exactly.
Definitely.
So I mentioned Houston in the show with the chairman, and Jerry knows this. You know, they've had a very weird metric profile because their predictive metrics have been exceptionally high. Their results metrics have been very low because they lost a couple early and then they didn't play a lot of featured games. But now you look at it as a number 2 seed. I don't know, a lot of people are talking about them as a national championship contender. You know, with all this talk about the SEC and their separation, rightly so, it's almost like Houston's flying under the radar. But I think they're as good as any team in the country, particularly the improvement of their transfer point guard, Milos Uzan, coming from Oklahoma, having to replace Jamal Shed. Houston, a little under the radar for our 2 seed.
Yeah, lockdown defense, and they can hit threes at an elite level as well. And maybe flying under the radar because we're learning how historic this season has been for the SEC so far. And, Jerry, I want to total it up, see all of your picks here by conference. You've gone from 14 to 13 SEC teams. 11 is the old record.
Yeah, and they may break that. But then you've got the Big 10 with 10, you got the Big 12 with 8. So when I talk about bracketing a nightmare, it's not just the SEC.
Correct.
You've got 3 conferences with a very high number of teams that you've got to try and stay separated.